figured that I needed a lot of white space on every single page. And the reason is I figured if there was white space, that meant dialogue. If there was dialogue, that meant that I was doing enough scenes. I believe that if you get your scenes right, you get your story right. And you use your scenes to build the rhythm of the story. But it is the scenes that bring your story to life. And it is the place where I like to embed things like setting and description is in the scene itself. And I think part of that is that it's helpful to the reader. The reader wants to be shown what's going on, and the scene does it. So the scene is a mini story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. After the end of action, there is usually what is called the sequel. Now, this is a scene and sequel. This notion that the scene has a sequel is actually a term that I only ran into in the last 5 or 8 years. And I thought, so they've added sequel to scenes now? I guess I had to pay attention to this. And actually, nothing was added at all. They just decided, a lot of writing instructors, and now me, decided that you have to pay attention to what happens after the scene, because that's part of what's going on. And they just gave it its own name, and that's the sequel, which is fine with me. I'm glad it has its own name now, but it's always been there. And the sequel is basically how the world has changed after the scene, because every scene should leave a changed world. The protagonist might be changed, the world might be changed, the person who is opposed to the protagonist might be changed, but something has changed by the end of the scene. And everything that happens in the story is an accumulation of what has happened, what change has been left behind by each scene. I thought, okay, good, it has its own name now. But it was always there. You know, you go back as far as you want in fiction, and there's always a sequel. What is the world like after this scene? Now, for those of you who have taken my classes, I'm going to repeat something that you've heard before, but I can't help it. This is like my greatest hits. And that is, I'm going to describe a couple scenes from The Wizard of Oz. Why The Wizard of Oz? Because we all love The Wizard of Oz, but mostly because we've all seen The Wizard of Oz. And it would be hard if I gave you, let's take a scene from Scenes of a Marriage. Let's take a scene from The Walking Dead. I could grab a lot of scenes that would be useful. But we've all seen The Wizard of Oz, so it gives us a point of reference. And I'm going to break down a couple scenes in that movie. First off, one thing that we have to understand about our protagonist is that the protagonist needs to be somebody who is likable. And then, as Robert Heinlein says, you find a likable character and you torture that character for the rest of the story. And that's how storytelling works. What makes a character likable? Anybody want to give a guess? What makes a character likable? Why do we like certain characters? I found that there's kind of an answer to it, and that is pluck. Remember that word, pluck? Gumption. The character doesn't have to be a nice person. We all love Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. She was a morally corrupt. She did hideous, horrible things to people. But she was like the only character in the entire Southern America who still had pluck after the Civil War. She had pluck during the Civil War, so we end up pulling for her because she's not a victim. And she was like the only person in the South who was not a victim in that book. And that got our attention. And so we kind of pull for her. We pull for her because she wasn't a victim. So coming back to The Wizard of Oz, is Dorothy a victim? She is for the first half of the book. And if she didn't change halfway through the movie in a very powerful scene, which I'll break down, we wouldn't have liked that movie as well. because the Dorothy we see in the first half of the book is getting pushed around. We open up and she's on the farm and she's got all this stuff going in her head and nobody's paying any attention to her. She goes to her Auntie M, she goes to her uncle. Everybody ignores her. The farm hands ignore her. So she has to step aside and sing Somewhere Over the Rainbow. That takes us a ways toward liking her. And then she goes back into the kitchen of the farmhouse. And the mean witch who lives a couple doors down wants to take Toto. Now, what do we know about Dorothy and Toto at this point? We don't know much, but we know a couple things. We have learned that Dorothy is not with her parents. She's with her Auntie M and her uncle. We don't know what happened to her parents. Presumably, she's an orphan. And we know that she's very attached to Toto. We can kind of guess that Toto might have been part of an earlier life for her. That's why she wants to go home. She's an orphan. And nobody at the farm's paying attention to her. And then boom, here's the scene. The witch comes in and she has an order from the sheriff to take Toto because Toto bit her and Toto dug up her garden. This is the one thing in a farm where everybody's ignoring her and doesn't have time for her. The one thing she has is Toto. And the scene is her, you always look at a scene as, what does the character want? What's the opposition? And the witch comes in and has the sheriff's order to take Toto. So, of course, Dorothy looks to her aunt and uncle for support and help, and she gets a big shrug. That kicks off the story. That's the scene. The sequel is that she goes into her room and she's feeling defeated. And she was defeated in that scene, because in every scene, the protagonist or the point of view character faces some kind of opposition, and they either succeed or they fail. And she fails. So the point of view in this scene is Dorothy. What are the stakes? The stakes is she's losing her dog, which seems to be the only connection in her life that's like real. Who wins? The witch wins. What's the world like afterwards? Dorothy is completely dejected. She goes into her bedroom. She's all alone. That's how the scene ends. That's how the world has changed. Dorothy has lost the one thing that was meaningful to her in a world that doesn't give a hoot about her. That's a powerful scene. She's a victim. Okay. All kinds of exciting things happen. Toto escapes from the witch, comes home with Dorothy. Dorothy realizes she can't keep Toto, so she's going to have to run away. Lots of things happen with Dorothy. What we see the beginning of some gumption. She's not going to let Toto be taken away from her again. So she escapes with Toto, and she's not quite all the way back from being a victim, but she is kind of, because she wants to do something. She takes Toto, and then there's the guy selling snake oil out of the wagon, and he's actually very kind to her. And then she realized she can't run away from home. On her way home, there's a tornado. So it's a very exciting story. Scared the heck out of me when I was a little kid. A tornado haunted me for years. I watched the movie kind of like this, because it was on every year. It was on TV. And I didn't know until much later that when she gets to Oz, the world goes into color. We had a black and white TV, so it was like it went from one kind of black and white to a different looking black and white. And I had probably seen the movie 10 times before I found out that Oz is in color. Okay, so she kills the witch's sister inadvertently. The witch is after her, and they send her out on the yellow brick road so she can figure out how to get home. Okay, and a lot of different scenes happen, and she continues to kind of not get what she wants, but at least she's on a road. So the next big scene, well, there's a lot of scenes, but there's one big one in the middle here that changes the entire story. And it changes Dorothy. And that's when she's going down the yellow brick road and she has the Tin Man and she has the Scarecrow and Toto. And out of the woods, you know, it's before that scene, she's talking about being afraid of lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. And then what happens is a lion comes out of the woods and terrifies the three. And so we have the perfect scene where they're going along on a road and something horrible happens. This lion jumps out. And the lion jumps out and confronts the three travelers and their little dog. And he confronts each of the characters, just totally frightens them, and they're totally intimidated. Then something happens. He turns, the lion turns his attention on Toto. Now remember who Toto is for Dorothy. Toto's everything. Toto's the only real connection she has. And the lion has turned on Toto. So what happens to Dorothy? She flips and she confronts the lion. She slaps him in the face. And what happens to the lion? He totally crumbles because he's a cowardly rock lion. And what we see in this scene changes the entire story. We see that Dorothy is no longer a victim. In that one defense of Toto, which is the perfect moment for her as she's defending Toto, she turns into a warrior. Now, what's the point of view? The point of view is Dorothy. What are the stakes? They're being terrified by a dangerous animal. Who wins or loses during the action? Well, for a change, Dorothy wins. And how has the world changed afterward? All of a sudden, like I say, Dorothy has become a warrior. Now, what happens in the sequel to that scene? The sequel to that scene is the lion admits he's a coward, gets to sing that wonderful song about courage. And then he is invited to join this merry little band. So he becomes one of them. So Dorothy totally wins that scene. She has become a different character through that scene. So Dorothy's change doesn't happen through telling. We watch Dorothy change as her reaction to her environment has changed completely to what it used to be. And that is what saves her as a character. We're pulling for her for the rest of the story because she showed us that pluck. And we got to witness it happen in real time. We aren't told that she gained a pluck. We aren't told that she's changed. We aren't told that this scene makes all the difference. We get to watch it ourselves. And that's the beauty of scenes, is we aren't told what the stakes are. We've seen what the stakes are because of the scenes that came before. And we see what the stakes are in this scene. We're seeing everything. A lot of times in writing classes, I will say things like, we need more feelings in this. How do you get feelings into a story? You create scenes in which the feelings are obvious. We are told when Dorothy loses Toto at the very beginning of the movie, we're not told that she feels really bad. We're shown what happens and we know how she feels. And in the scene with the cowardly lion, we're not told how she feels when she backs down the lion and saves Toto. We know how she feels. So an awful lot of getting the stakes into your story, getting feelings into the story is just creating scenes where it's obvious to the reader or viewer in this case, what is happening because of the scene. We know how she feels all the way through this movie without us ever being told how she feels. That's how we get emotion into the story. We get it in through scenes. We get it in by setting it up so we know what the stakes are. And then we use scenes to develop the rhythm of the story. So here we are about half to 2/3 the way through The Wizard of Oz, and all of a sudden Dorothy wins one. So does that end the story? No, because then comes the reversal. So what happens is we're going along, the protagonist has taken a lot of hits. Finally, the protagonist wins one, and we're not at the end of the story, because then there's usually a reversal where something that happens is even worse than what has happened so far, and that is when she gets to the Emerald City and they find the wizard, and she doesn't know the wizard's a phony yet. We kind of do as the viewer. Again, we aren't told that the wizard is phony, but we see it when he's behind the thing. And then Toto, of course, is the one who reveals to us. But the big reversal is the wizard says, "You're not all the way there yet. I need the witch's broom." And of course, that's the wizard's way of just dispensing with Dorothy. But Dorothy takes him up on it, and Dorothy goes out to get the witch's broom. Now, the Dorothy who hadn't stood up to the lion never could have gone off to get the broom. But the Dorothy who stood up to the lion can. We've seen that she has that capability of being a warrior. And now we've had a huge reversal. And she goes out and continues to be. Now she has to deal with flying monkeys. That was the other thing that really scared me. I was scared to death of those flying monkeys, again, watching it like this. And that's what to look for in the story. You create the reversal through scenes. You can think of it in terms of the protagonist loses and loses and loses, and finally gets up and wins a big one. And then that's not it. Then there's a reversal. And the reversal means that your protagonist is going to have to dig down a little bit deeper, and the stakes have just escalated. And that's your story. And it's all scenes. Scenes don't have to be long. I'm going to read a quick scene here. By the way, I'm going to end on time, just in case you're wondering. I believe that when you're speaking until noon, you end at noon. And I'm going to try to leave time for Q&A too. But I want to read this interesting two scenes. There's two related scenes that are very short, but they do everything you want a scene to do. And this is from The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. A number of you have probably read that. It's one of the biggest memoirs of the last, decade or so. It's a really nice story of childhood of poverty. And here is just a short page, two quick scenes that really capture an awful lot of what's going on in the lives of three children. The point of view character is Jeanette Walls. And here we go. Around that time, probably because of all the garbage, a big nasty looking river rat took up residence at 93 Little Hobart Street. I first saw him in the sugar bowl. This rat was too big to fit in an ordinary sugar bowl, but since Mom had a powerful sweet tooth, putting at least 8 teaspoons in a cup of tea, we kept our sugar in a punch bowl on the kitchen table. That's what I mean by inserting the description into the scene. This is the scene setting, and like a lot of scenes, we get the picture, and the picture is more than just physical description. It's this crazy life they're living. This rat was not just eating the sugar, he was bathing in it, wallowing in it, positively luxuriating in it, his flicking tail hanging over the side of the bowl, flinging sugar across the table. When I saw him, I froze and backed out of the kitchen. I told Brian, this is her brother, and we opened the kitchen door cautiously. The rat had climbed out of the sugar bowl and leaped upon the stove. We would see his teeth marks on the pile of potatoes, our dinner, on a plate on the stove. Okay, there's another little bit of description. There are obviously some poverty here. Dinner is going to be potatoes. Brian threw the cast iron skillet at the rat. It hit him and clanged on the floor, but instead of fleeing, the rat hissed at us as if we were the intruders. We ran out of the kitchen, slammed the door, and stuffed rags in the gap beneath it. First mini scene. Part of your character, Jeanette Walls. And what's the opposition? It's this rat standing between them and their dinner. And who wins? The rat wins. Okay. So, you know, just the tiniest little scene has all these elements. It has description, it has the protagonist, it has the opposition, and we find out who wins or loses. The sequel here is, we ran out of the kitchen, slammed the door, and stuffed the rags in the gap beneath it. That's the sequel. That's how the world has changed. The rat has won the kitchen. Okay, and then here comes another scene that's related. That night, Maureen, who was 5, was too terrified to sleep. She kept on saying that the rat was coming together. She could hear it creeping nearer and nearer. I told her to stop being such a wuss. I really do hear the rat, she said. I think he's close to me. I told her she was letting fear get the best of her. And since this was one of those times that we had electricity, I turned on the light to prove it. Now, of course, we all know the scene. We're little kids. We're lying in bed. We know there's a dragon underneath our bed. And our parents don't buy it. Well, it's the same thing. Only this time it's different. I turned on the light to prove it. There, crouched on Maureen's lavender blanket, I'll give a little bit of description. A few inches away from her face was the rat. She screamed and pushed off the covers, and the rat jumped to the floor. I got a broom and tried to hit the rat with the handle, but it dodged me. Brian grabbed the baseball bat, and we maneuvered it, hissing and snapping into a corner. Our dog, Tinkle, the part Jack Russell Terrier who had followed Brian home one day, caught the rat in his jaws and banged it on the floor until it was dead. When Mom ran into the room, Tinkle was strutting around all pumped up like the proud beast slayer that he was. Mom said she felt a little sorry for the rat. Rats need to eat too, she pointed out. Even though it was dead, it deserved a name, she went on. She christened it Rufus. Okay, here comes the sequel. Brian, who had read that primitive warriors placed the body parts of their victim on stakes to scare off their enemies, hung Rufus by the tail from a poplar tree in front of our house the next morning. That afternoon, we heard a round of gunshots. Mr. Freeman, who lived next door, had seen the rat hanging upside down. Rufus was so big, Mr. Freeman thought he was a possum. Went out, got his hunting rifle, and blew him clean away. There was nothing left of Rufus but a mangled piece of tail. So, the kids won one here, thanks to Tinkle. They didn't lose. But what do we find out about Mom in this story? Whose side is Mom on? She's on the rat side. We learn a lot about Mom's inability to really parent effectively through scenes like this, where the kids are kind of on their own. They have to find it in themselves to have pluck. I mean, Brian did throw the skillet at the rat in the kitchen, and then took the broom to the rat in the bedroom. But ultimately, it was Tinkle who was able to really conquer the rat. But at least the kids were trying, and Mom doesn't care. So again, we have a scene that's telling us what we need to know about what's going on with this family. You know, there's other scenes like that where Dad doesn't come through. It's a whole story of parents being ineffective, and we get it all through scenes. We're never told that mom isn't a good mother. We watch it happen. And the thing that's kind of amazing about this book is, like a lot of kids, the kids aren't in judgment of their parents. And we see that through the scenes, that horrible things happen. The kids aren't going, we have a really bad mom, or we have a really bad dad. They just adjust to it and go on like kids do. But we as the reader go, they had a really bad mom. They had a really bad dad, because she shows us this is happening through scenes. We don't get told that these are ineffectual parents. And that's the beauty of scenes, is we let the reader figure out. Now we know what we want the reader to conclude, but we don't have the characters voice that. The characters are just living out their lives. We're the ones making judgments. Of course, we're making judgments that the writer wants us to make. But anyway, scenes can be brief. They can cover more than one setting, as it does in that. The point of view character, of course, in Glass Castle is Jeanette. What do the kids want? Because you can always look at the protagonist. And here we kind of have three. Even though the point of view character is Jeanette, we also have Brian and Maureen in there. And they all want the same thing. They want to be free from this rat. Did they get it? They didn't get it in the first scene, but they got it in the second scene. And of course, the sequel is taking the rat out, and the next door neighbor blows it away. So, one thing I found in writing story and writing scenes is I usually start out not knowing where the heck I'm going. If I know where I'm going, the starting isn't as fun. I know a lot of different people start their stories and novels and memoirs in different ways. I like to just start writing and seeing whether I can find a voice I like, whether I can find a character I like. And if I can't find a voice I like, I can't do the story. But since I'm not starting out with a plot, and I think plots are critical, I don't really know where I'm going. I just want to find out whether I can create a world and a character and a voice that I want to hang out in. And usually what I'm looking for in a voice is, does this voice open things that I might not think to open myself? So I know it sounds crazy. A lot of you have probably experienced the same thing, probably every one of you, that I want to create a world and a character where it takes on a life of its own. I'm not smart enough to write a story, so I have to kind of rely on different parts of my brain that aren't necessarily conscious to do some of the work. And I usually get that by writing along. I get this scene, I have this character, and I go along, and then I go, hey, you know, this has some life to it. If it doesn't have life to it, I know it early. I know it in 20 pages, 30, 40 at the most. I know I can't blow life into this thing. But if it has a life of its own, then I'm good. The only problem is I get to page 30, 40, 50, and even if I'm doing a short story, maybe I'm getting to page 5, 10, 15, and I don't have a plot. I have some random scenes here and there. I have a character I like. I have a world that I like. And at that point, I go, okay, now I've done what all of you I'm sure have done. Is I've done this where I get to 40 pages, 50 pages, and I go, all of a sudden this thing isn't working. And it isn't working because I don't have a plot yet. And so a lot of times I think, gosh, you know, I thought I had something going here. And now at page 40 or 50, this thing has just kind of died on me. Well, now I've learned, this took decades, unfortunately, I guess. Sometimes it takes a long time to learn how to write. I learned something. I learned that if I can blow blow life into a story, at some point I have to stop and create a plot. And that'll get me to the other end. If it's good enough that I like it and it has some life to it, then it's good enough that I stop meandering and start to chart out a course for these characters in this world. And that's how I learned to get to the end of a novel-length memoir or fiction story, is by stopping at that page 40 to 60 when it started dying on me. Realize, yes, dying on me for a reason. I'm still meandering around when I should be doing some construction work. For me, the construction work is scenes. In my meandering around, I might have created 2 or 3 scenes that I really like, but they aren't going anywhere. And so at that point, I do scene cards. Has anybody done scene cards? I love scene cards. They're index cards. I've tried to do it online, but it just isn't as much fun as an index card. And I write down what this scene is. This is the scene where Mari breaks her leg because her sister was paying attention to her friends instead of paying attention to her little sister, and her little sister gets hit by a car. I know I need that scene. I have to write that scene. Who's in the scene? The scene is Mari, her older sister's friends. And what happens is the older sister wants to hang out with friends instead of taking care of her little sister, and her little sister chases the cat into the street and gets hit by a car. And I have everything I need. The stakes are, unfortunately, the kid who gets hit by the car is just an example of what the older sister isn't doing. Very dramatic example, but she's not the focus. The focus is the older sister who should have been watching. And the stakes are, I just almost killed my sister. And I platted that out in a scene. Okay, I know it, that's a big scene right there. And then I have other scenes leading up to it so that by the time we get to the park and have the little sister running into the street, we know this is going to happen because we know the character of the characters. We know we have a little sister who's autistic and wild. We know we have a big sister who's tired of being in charge of her autistic sister and just can't take it anymore. Consequences are dire. We saw it coming. So when it happens, the reader's going, it's shocking, it's horrible. It's the worst thing that can happen to this older sister. But we saw it coming because we had about 5 scenes leading up to it where we saw the setup. And so when we get to that horrible scene, it makes sense. Now, it's the same thing with The Wizard of Oz. When we get to the point where the cowardly lion jumps in front of Dorothy, we have the setup. We know that Dorothy's biggest connection is Toto, and she will not again allow that connection to be broken. It doesn't matter that he was a cowardly lion. She would have stood up to a lion who wasn't cowardly. We know that. We know that going in. We've seen the setup because we saw all the scenes that led up to it. By this time, the reader knows these characters. So I do that at somewhere. It's a book-length story. It's somewhere around 40 or 50 pages in where I go, okay, I like this world. I'm willing to commit to it. Now I got a plot. What the heck is going to happen? And that's kind of a fun moment for me because that ends the question of, have I written these first 60 pages for no reason at all? The idea of being able to plot it out with scenes says, hey, I think I can say this. I think I can go another 120 pages on this sucker because I've got the setup. I like the character. I like the world. And now I can kind of see where this is going. I can see what the weaknesses are in these characters. I can see what the strengths are. And let's just play them against each other. And I do that by saying, what kind of scene do I need next? What kind of scene? Once you know what scene you need next, that helps you figure out the close of the preceding scene. Try to get a cliffhanger in there if you can. Can't always get a cliffhanger in there as part of the sequel, but you know, you can. In The Wizard of Oz, there's usually a cliffhanger in that first scene where the witch has taken away the dog. Dorothy's in her bedroom and she's in absolute despair. Something's got to give. And so that's kind of the cliffhanger, is she's not going to hang out in that horrible place forever. She's going to do something. She runs away from home. And all the way through, it's the same thing. She's up against the wall. She does something because we chose the character who has pluck. So again, we torture the character. We get that character in a horrible predicament, and we watch, what is that character going to do? Now, in my story that I talked about, where the little girl runs into traffic and the big girl feels horrible because she was supposed to be watching her little girl, her little sister, where I take that is, this is where that older sister finally stands up to her parents and says, she's too crazy. I can't be in charge of her. Look what happened. Because she finally separates what has happened from her own guilt feelings and seeing that this would have happened at some point, at any point. And that's where she finally stands up and says, you know, basically she cracks the family dynamic of, well, let's let the older sister take care of our autistic daughter. She's good at it. And it lets the parents off the hook. And then finally, she has to say, I'm not an adult. This is not my daughter. She's your daughter. And she stands up for herself. Now, the kid who gets hit by the car, she's just a kid. She is in some ways a prop to get the main character, the older sister, in a mess, and then finally get that point of view character, our hero with pluck, to stand up for herself. Look for those elements and then show them, don't tell them. So when I do these cards, I have certain things on the card. Who's in the scene? Whose point of view is it? What is the opposition? What does the character want? What do other characters in the scene want? And most of all, and I think is the important thing to remember in every scene and in every ounce of your story, short or long, what are the stakes? The stakes are where we show the emotions of the character. What are the stakes? What are the stakes for Dorothy? She wants family connection. That's the stake. She has no family connection. And those are her stakes through the whole end. What happens at the end of the story? She's in her room and everybody's surrounding her and she's connected to everything. Part of it is that Dorothy has changed. Dorothy realizes she's part of the connection. She has some responsibility for the connection. So what are the stakes? What blocks each character from getting what he or she wants? The rat wants to eat. What's the action? We see the action. What are the results or twists at the end of it? And what is the world like afterwards? I write all those things on the card. Some of them are really obvious to me, but I write them down anyway, because what's obvious today, I might not remember tomorrow. That's one thing I've learned from writing too, is all the things I know about my story today, half of those I will have forgotten by tomorrow. So other considerations, how does this scene lead to the next scene? I always work on my sequels so that they become kind of the fertile ground for bursting into the next scene. I try to burst into scenes, but you know, I don't do that with every scene because that, you know, it's got to be more organic than to just say, okay, I'm going to burst into the action of every scene. How does it lead to the next? Again, I write down how the scene has changed the world. How has it changed the protagonist, even if it's slight? And then when I'm all done, I go back and edit the scene.